Welcome to Esoteric Thoughts. If I told you about a man who was created from the soil by a god and lives among the animals in a garden setting, who was introduced to a woman who tempts him, he accepts her offering of food, decides to cover his nakedness, leaves paradise and is not allowed to return, I'm sure you would think I am referring to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, but I'm not. I am making reference to Enkidu and Shamhat, the 2000 BC story in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Many scholars recognize that the parallels between the Epic of Gilgamesh in tablets 1 and 2 and the book of Genesis are so obvious that the authors of the Bible must have used them. The Epic of Gilgamesh is an epic poem from Mesopotamia, written in cuneiform, and is one of the earliest known works of literature. It predates the biblical text by hundreds and hundreds of years. The use of a female figure as the cause of enlightenment between good and evil is present in both stories. In Genesis, Eve offered Adam the apple from the forbidden tree and Adam ate it, whereas in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Shamhat offered bread and wine to Enkidu, eventually leading him to being enlightened of the good and evil that exist in the world, when previously he had only known about the instinct to survive. Whilst there are differences in the story that we will explore, Bible apologists try to dismiss the similarities because the stories are not identical, which is an invalid concept given how much the biblical text has been copied or plagiarized from older traditions and myths. No one would expect a one-for-one textual copy. Before we look at the parallels, let's briefly explore the Enkidu story. Remember that this is ancient mythology and is in no way to be taken as literal. Gilgamesh, ruler of Uruk, treated his people very cruelly. However, as a result of Gilgamesh being part god, part man, his power was unmatched on earth. The gods created a creature from clay, Enkidu. When Enkidu came to earth, he lived in the wild and was a part of nature, as well as being a representation of the gods. His role was to do the agricultural hard labour of the lesser gods in the garden, fields and watering holes, producing food for the Anunnaki gods. Gilgamesh heard of Enkidu's existence and sent a harlot, a sacred prostitute called Shamhat, to the forest, for Enkidu needed to be tamed and taught the arts of civilization. If we take a closer look at the inscriptions written in cuneiform on the Epic of Gilgamesh tablets, we see in tablet 1 there's a description of his body. It reads, "His whole body was shaggy with hair. He had a full head of hair like a woman. His locks billowed in profusion like Ashnan. He knew neither people nor settled living, but wore a garment like Sumerian. He ate grasses with the gazelles, and jostled at the watering hole with the animals. As with animals, his thirst was slaked with mere water." It goes on further to give a description of when Shamhat first saw Enkidu. "The animals arrived and drank at the watering hole. The wild beasts arrived and slaked their thirst with water. Then he, Enkidu, offspring of the mountain, who eats grasses with the gazelles, came to the watering hole with the animals. With the wild beasts he slaked his thirst with water. Then Shamhat saw him, a primitive, savage fellow from the depths of the wilderness." Now Genesis objects to these notions via a series of inversions, reversals and recastings, and has created a new story which denies, refutes and challenges the Mesopotamian stories of how, why, and where man came to be made and his purpose in life. But similarly, in the Genesis myth, Eve's influence over Adam led to his downfall. Living in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were instructed by God not to eat from a specific tree. However, Eve bit the fruit and convinced Adam to eat also. Adam and Eve's actions led to them, and thus mankind, to forever be born into sin. In the biblical narrative, Eve's actions caused the world to be the way it is. Let's explore some of the parallels, some of which are in some instances deliberate inversions or reversals of the Mesopotamia myths, and understandings of the relationship between primeval naked man and his creators. Eden is Sumerian for uncultivated treeless land, a plain, desert, or a wilderness. Eden, in the biblical text, is the garden where the Genesis story begins. Eden has two streams which water it, the Tigris and the Euphrates. In the biblical text, the Garden of Eden has 4 rivers, 2 of which are identical to the Sumerian version, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The gods create fruit tree gardens before man's creation. Similarly, in the Bible, God creates a fruit tree garden before the creation of man. Naked primeval man, Enkidu, is created by a goddess and placed in Eden. Enkidu has no mother or father. Similarly, in the biblical text, naked primeval man called Adam is created by a god and placed in the Garden of Eden. Adam likewise has no mother or father. Enkidu was made from clay. Adam was formed from the dust of the ground. The gods created naked Enkidu to till and care for their fruit tree gardens, surrounded by the uncultivated Eden. God creates naked Adam to till and care for his fruit tree garden, surrounded by a location called Eden. Enkidu's name is broken down into 3 syllables: En, meaning Lord, Ki, meaning earth, and Du, meaning good. Thus it can be translated to mean the Lord of the good earth. Adam is made the Lord of the good earth by God, having dominion over God's creation, which is declared as good. Both Enkidu and Adam roamed naked and were not ashamed of their nakedness. Enkidu has wild animals for companions in Eden. Adam has wild animals for his companions in the Garden of Eden. The animals, namely gazelles, are no harm to Enkidu, for they are herbivores and he is not a threat to them because he eats grass. He is a vegetarian. The animals in the Garden of Eden eat plants. Adam eats fruits and herbs. Both are herbivores, so no harm to each other. Enkidu meets a naked woman in Eden called Shamhat. She replaces his animals as his companion. Adam has a naked Eve in the garden, and she is declared a more fit companion than the animals. Enkidu and Shamhat are not the first man and woman according to the Sumerian text. In the biblical text, Adam and Eve are the first man and woman. Enkidu and Shamhat clothed their nakedness before leaving Eden. Adam and Eve clothed their nakedness before leaving the garden. In the Epic of Gilgamesh text, no gods are outraged over man's learning that it is wrong to be naked, but they still expel him from the garden. In the biblical text, an outraged god upon discovering that man has learned that it is wrong to be naked, expel him from the garden, cursing the ground on his behalf. Shamhat is not cursed by her God, whereas Eve is cursed by her God. Enkidu blames Shamhat for his imminent death and loss of innocence. Adam blames Eve for his loss of innocence. He will lose his life for following her instead of God. Enkidu initially rejects the eating of bread, but submits to Shamhat and he eats. Now Enkidu has acquired knowledge via eating, is declared now as being a human, and is now aware of his nakedness. Adam is warned not to eat the forbidden fruit, but he submits to Eve and he eats. Adam now acquires the knowledge of good and evil, realizing that it is wrong to be naked, thus clothing himself. The gods wear clothes and eat bread, not grass. Enkidu becomes like a god. He too now eats bread like a god, is clothed like a god, and knows like a god that it is wrong to be naked. In Genesis, after eating, Adam puts on clothing. He has become like a god, knowing that it is wrong to be naked. Enkidu curses the hunter who brought Shamhat to him to ensnare him and separate him from his animal companions, asking his God to diminish the hunter's profits. In the Bible, God curses the ground on Adam's behalf. Its yields will be reduced, thus Adam's profits will be diminished. The gods defend Shamhat and reprimand Enkidu. They withdraw the curse and give her a blessing instead. The gods tell Enkidu that Shamhat gave him a fine robe to cover his nakedness, and food and drink fit for a god to consume. She has given him blessings of civilized life, ending his savage existence. In the Bible, God does not defend Eve. He blames her for enticing Adam to sin. God is outraged that a naked Adam and Eve are clothed, for this means they have knowledge of good and evil and know it is wrong to be naked. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods approved of naked man's acquisition of clothing in Eden. They approved of man's learning that it is wrong to be naked. In the Bible, God expels Adam and Eve from the garden. Enkidu and Shamhat eventually die. Adam and Eve eventually die. The argument of biblical plagiarism is vigorously defended by Bible apologists. One argument claims the authors are simply borrowing from older, more ancient stories, but we can't forget that the Bible is meant to be the Word of God. Therefore, that places a greater emphasis on the sacred text, as it is meant to be the original, authentic, and divine. Also, if the Bible authors are borrowing from older, more ancient myths, does that then confirm that the biblical stories are not true and are not the Word of God? Some people see plagiarism as just borrowing an idea and not giving the person who created it acknowledgement or credit. But it's actually much more serious than that. The fact that over 2 billion people take the Bible as literal and allow it to control their lives and the lives of others, the basis of which to create wars and conflicts, run governments and institutions, all because the origins of the stories have been denied, suppressed, and hidden. This makes the significance of the textual copying critical to our existence. We will further explore more Bible myth origins as part of this series. Thank you.